The sun cast a warm golden glow through the vast windows of Terminal B, where families hurried past with luggage in tow and announcements echoed over the intercom. Among the crowd stood Marcus, a wiry 12-year-old boy with bright eyes full of wonder. Today was special. It wasn't just any ordinary day. It marked his very first airplane ride. Clutching his boarding pass tightly in one hand and holding onto his mother's arm with the other, Marcus felt like he was stepping into a world of adventure. His mom, Angela, smiled down at him as they joined the line to board their flight. "You excited, buddy?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with exhaustion from the long wait at security. Marcus nodded eagerly, unable to contain his grin. "I can't believe we're really going to see Grandma and Grandpa," he exclaimed. He had been counting down the days for weeks, imagining what it would feel like to soar above the clouds. Angela chuckled gently, brushing a stray curl off Marcus's forehead. She knew how much this trip meant to him, not just because it was his first flight, but also because it had been 2 years since they last visited his grandparents. Life had been tough lately, juggling work and taking care of Marcus on her own, so this vacation felt like a well-deserved break for both of them. As they approached the gate, Marcus glanced around curiously. The terminal buzzed with activity, people chatting loudly, children laughing, suitcases rolling noisily across the tiled floor. But something caught his eye: posters of sleek airplanes soaring against clear blue skies, promising luxury and comfort. One poster even showed passengers relaxing in spacious seats, sipping drinks while gazing out of large windows. "Mom," Marcus said suddenly, pointing at the image. "What's that part called? Where people sit like kings?" Angela followed his gaze and chuckled again. "That's called first class, sweetheart. It's fancier than the regular seats, but it costs more money." Marcus tilted his head thoughtfully. "Do you think someday we'll get to fly like that?" Angela hesitated for a moment before answering. "Maybe one day when things are better," she replied softly, ruffling his hair. Though her tone was light, there was an unspoken weight behind her words. They weren't exactly struggling, but luxuries like first-class flights were far beyond their reach right now. Still, Marcus didn't seem discouraged. To him, every possibility shimmered with hope. When it was finally their turn to board, Marcus practically bounced toward the jet bridge, his sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. As they entered the plane, he craned his neck to take everything in: the rows of seats, the overhead compartments, and the friendly flight attendants greeting passengers. Their assigned seats were near the back of the aircraft, which didn't dampen Marcus's enthusiasm. He settled into his window seat, pressing his face against the glass to watch the ground crew prepare for departure. But then, something unexpected happened. A tall man in a crisp uniform approached their row, glancing at Marcus's ticket. "Excuse me, young man," he said, his voice polite but firm. "This seat has been reassigned. You'll need to move to economy class." Confusion washed over Marcus's face. "But isn't this economy?" he asked innocently. The man hesitated briefly before replying, "Actually, these are premium seats reserved for certain passengers. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." Angela stepped in quickly, trying to smooth things over. "Of course we understand," she said, though her jaw tightened slightly. Together, she and Marcus gathered their belongings and moved further back into the plane, leaving behind the coveted row by the window. As Marcus settled into his new seat, a cramped spot sandwiched between two strangers, he couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment. For the first time, he noticed the subtle differences between sections of the plane. Up front, passengers lounged comfortably, sipping beverages served in glassware. Back here, everyone seemed squeezed together, resigned to their tight quarters. Little did Marcus know this small incident would set off a chain of events that would change his perspective and his life forever. The hum of the airplane engines filled the cabin as Marcus adjusted himself awkwardly in his new seat. It was cramped, with barely enough room to stretch his legs, and the man sitting next to him had already fallen asleep, leaning slightly into Marcus's space. Despite his earlier excitement, a heavy cloud of disappointment settled over him. He glanced toward the front of the plane. where passengers were settling into their spacious first-class seats. The contrast between where he sat now and where he imagined himself couldn't have been starker. Angela noticed her son's quiet demeanor and leaned closer, whispering softly, "Hey, don't let it get to you, okay? We're still flying, and that's what matters." Her voice carried warmth, but there was also an undertone of frustration she couldn't fully hide. She knew how unfair life could be at times, especially for someone like Marcus who deserved so much more than what they currently had. Marcus nodded slowly, forcing a small smile for his mom's sake. "I know," he murmured. But deep down, he couldn't shake off the sting of being moved from one seat to another, not because of anything he or his mom had done, but simply because someone else thought he didn't belong there. As the plane taxied down the runway, Marcus pressed his face against the tiny oval window, watching the world blur past. For a moment, the sheer thrill of taking off distracted him. The ground fell away, and the city below transformed into a patchwork of rooftops and roads. His heart raced as the aircraft climbed higher, piercing through soft white clouds until everything outside turned serene and endless. But even amid the breathtaking view, Marcus couldn't help but feel out of place. Around him, other kids laughed and played with their gadgets while adults chatted animatedly about vacations or business trips. In contrast, Marcus stayed silent, clutching the armrest tightly during turbulence, unsure if he should join in the collective energy around him. About halfway through the flight, a flight attendant approached their row, offering snacks and drinks. When she reached Marcus, she handed him a small bag of pretzels and a cup of apple juice. "Here you go, sweetheart," she said kindly, giving him a warm smile. For a brief second, Marcus felt seen, like maybe not everyone on this plane saw him as just another passenger squeezed into economy class. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. What made some people worthy of those plush seats up front? Was it money? Status? Something else entirely? He turned to Angela, his brow furrowed. "Mom, why do some people get to sit in first class while others don't?" Angela sighed, choosing her words carefully. "Well, sometimes people pay extra for those seats because they want more comfort. Other times, companies give them out as rewards for loyalty or hard work. It's complicated." "But isn't flying supposed to be fair?" Marcus asked, innocently. "Everyone gets to go to the same place, right? Why does it matter where you sit?" His question hung in the air, unanswered. Angela didn't know how to explain the complexities of privilege and inequality to a child without making him feel bitter or resentful. Instead, she changed the subject, pointing out landmarks visible from the window and sharing stories about her own childhood travels. Slowly, Marcus began to relax, letting go of his earlier disappointment, at least for now. Later, as the flight attendants dimmed the lights and most passengers drifted off to sleep, Marcus found himself unable to rest. He stared ahead, catching glimpses of the first-class section whenever someone walked by. There was laughter there, muffled conversations, and the occasional clink of glassware. It all seemed so distant, almost like another world altogether. What Marcus didn't realize, however, was that fate had its own plans for him. Somewhere in the skies above, wheels were turning, plans set in motion long before this trip that would soon reveal a truth no one aboard the plane could have anticipated, not even Marcus himself. As the plane cruised smoothly through the night sky, Marcus's thoughts drifted between sleep and wakefulness. He tried to focus on the glowing screen of his handheld game console, a gift from his grandparents that he'd been saving to use during the flight. But every time laughter or clinking glasses echoed from the first-class section, his attention wandered back to the invisible barrier separating him from those privileged few. Angela had dozed off beside him, her head resting lightly against the window. Marcus envied her ability to relax so easily, but his mind was too restless. He kept replaying the earlier incident in his head, the uniformed man politely asking them to move, the sympathetic smiles of nearby passengers, and the sinking feeling of being told he didn't belong somewhere. Suddenly, a commotion near the front of the plane caught his attention. A tall figure dressed in an impeccably tailored suit emerged from the first-class cabin, walking briskly toward the rear of the aircraft. The man carried himself with authority, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. As he passed by Marcus's row, their eyes met briefly. For a fleeting moment, Marcus felt as though the man recognized him, though it seemed impossible. They were strangers, weren't they? The man stopped abruptly at the galley, speaking quietly with one of the flight attendants. His tone was calm, yet firm, and Marcus strained to hear what they were discussing. Though most of the conversation was muffled, fragments reached his ears. Ensure all passengers are comfortable, and review seating arrangements. Curiosity got the better of Marcus. Leaning forward slightly, he whispered to Angela, nudging her awake. "Mom, who's that guy?" Angela blinked groggily, following Marcus's gaze. When she spotted the well-dressed stranger, her expression shifted to mild surprise. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "He looks important, though." Just then, the flight attendant approached their row again, this time accompanied by the suited man. Marcus froze, unsure why someone like him would come all the way to the back of the plane. Surely people like that stayed up front where everything was nicer, more exclusive. "Excuse me," the man said, addressing Angela directly. His voice was smooth and confident with just a hint of warmth. "Are you traveling with your son?" Angela nodded cautiously, exchanging a puzzled glance with Marcus. "Yes, we are. Is something wrong?" The man smiled faintly, shaking his head. "No, nothing's wrong. I overheard earlier about the seating issue, and I wanted to personally apologize for any inconvenience caused." He paused, glancing down at Marcus, whose wide eyes betrayed both confusion and awe. "It wasn't right, and I assure you it won't happen again." Angela hesitated, clearly taken aback by the unexpected gesture. "Thank you," she replied slowly, still trying to process the situation. "We appreciate that." The man nodded, then turned his attention back to Marcus. "You seem like quite the traveler," he remarked, his tone light and friendly. "First flight?" Marcus nodded shyly, clutching the armrests tighter. "Yeah, it's my first time flying." "Well, congratulations," the man said with a genuine smile. "Flying is a wonderful experience no matter where you sit. Still," he trailed off, glancing meaningfully at the flight attendant standing nearby, "perhaps we can make the rest of your journey a little more comfortable." Before either Angela or Marcus could respond, the flight attendant stepped forward, holding 2 fresh boarding passes. "If you'd like, we can reassign you to open seats closer to the front of the plane," she offered politely. "There's extra legroom there, and it'll be quieter for sleeping." For a moment, Angela looked hesitant. Accepting such an offer felt strange, almost too good to be true, but seeing the sparkle of excitement returning to Marcus's eyes, she finally relented. "That's very kind of you," she said graciously. "Thank you." With the man's assurance that everything was settled, Angela and Marcus gathered their belongings once again and followed the flight attendant toward their new seats. As they walked past the first-class section, Marcus couldn't help but peek inside. Plush chairs, blankets folded neatly like origami, and passengers sipping champagne. It all felt impossibly luxurious. But just before they reached their upgraded row, the suited man called out softly, "One last thing." Turning around, Marcus saw him extend a business card toward Angela. "In case you ever need anything," the man added cryptically, his piercing gaze lingering on Marcus for just a second longer than necessary. Angela accepted the card with a polite nod, tucking it into her pocket without reading it. Little did she, or Marcus, know, the name printed on that small piece of paper would soon unravel secrets neither of them could have imagined. As Angela and Marcus settled into their new seats, 2 spacious rows near the front of the economy section, Marcus couldn't shake off the strange feeling that had taken root in his chest. The upgraded seats were undeniably more comfortable, with extra legroom and a quieter atmosphere. Yet it wasn't just the physical change that left him unsettled. It was the encounter with the suited man. Something about him felt oddly familiar, though Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on why. Angela, too, seemed distracted. She kept glancing at the business card tucked safely in her pocket, her brow furrowed as if debating whether to read it or leave it untouched. Finally, curiosity got the better of her. Pulling it out discreetly, she turned it over in her hands under the dim cabin lights. The card was sleek, embossed with gold lettering that stood out against its dark background. At the top, it read, Ethan, Caldwell Chief Executive Officer. Caldwell Airways. Angela's breath caught in her throat. Caldwell Airways? That name sounded familiar. It was plastered across every corner of this very plane. From the tail fin logo to the uniforms worn by the flight attendants, Caldwell Airways was everywhere. And now the CEO himself had personally intervened to ensure their comfort. "Mom?" Marcus whispered, noticing her stunned expression. "What does it say?" Angela hesitated before handing him the card. "It's the man who helped us. He's the boss of this airline." Marcus stared at the card, his young mind struggling to process the weight of what he was holding. "So, he owns the plane we're on?" he asked incredulously. Angela nodded slowly, still trying to make sense of it herself. "Looks like it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The realization hung heavy between them, mingling with unanswered questions. Why would someone as important as Ethan Caldwell take notice of them? Was it purely coincidence, or was there something deeper at play? Meanwhile, Marcus's thoughts raced ahead. If the man owned the airline, did that mean he could do anything he wanted? Could he decide who flew where, or even how they flew? It all seemed so surreal, like something out of a movie. But one thing was certain: Marcus didn't feel invisible anymore. For reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan Caldwell's actions made him feel seen in a way no one else ever had. The hours passed quietly after that. Marcus eventually drifted off to sleep, lulled by the gentle hum of the engines and the newfound comfort of his seat. Angela stayed awake longer, her mind replaying the events of the evening. She thought about the kindness in Ethan's voice, the way his eyes lingered on Marcus when he spoke. There was something almost paternal in his demeanor, though she quickly dismissed the idea as fanciful thinking. When morning broke, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden streaks across the cabin. Passengers began stirring, stretching stiff limbs and whispering excitedly about their impending arrival. Marcus woke up refreshed, his earlier disappointment replaced by renewed excitement for the day ahead. But as the plane descended toward its destination, another surprise awaited them. Over the intercom, the captain announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. On behalf of everyone at Caldwell Airways, I'd like to thank you for flying with us today. And before we touch down, our CEO, Mr. Ethan Caldwell, has a special announcement." A collective murmur rippled through the cabin as passengers exchanged curious glances. Marcus sat up straighter, his heart pounding with anticipation. Angela gripped the armrest nervously, unsure what to expect next. The intercom crackled again, and this time Ethan's smooth voice filled the cabin. "Good morning, everyone. As many of you know, Caldwell Airways strives to provide exceptional service to each and every passenger. Today, however, I'd like to acknowledge two very special travelers aboard this flight, Angela and her son Marcus." Marcus froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. Did Ethan just say their names on the intercom? Every head in the cabin turned toward them, some faces curious, others smiling warmly. Angela flushed red, sinking slightly lower in her seat as whispers spread among the passengers. "I hope your journey has been pleasant," Ethan continued, his tone sincere. "And remember, sometimes life surprises us in ways we never expect. Safe travels to all of you." By the time the plane touched down, Marcus's mind was spinning with questions. Who was Ethan Caldwell really? And why had he singled them out? Little did Marcus know the answers lay closer to home than he could have imagined, and they would change everything he thought he knew about his own life. As the plane taxied to a halt at the gate, Marcus felt like he was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. The announcement over the intercom had left him both thrilled and bewildered. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined being singled out by someone as important as the CEO of an airline, not to mention having his name broadcasted to an entire cabin full of strangers. Angela, on the other hand, looked uneasy. Her fingers drummed nervously against the armrest as she glanced around at the curious stares directed their way. She wasn't used to attention, especially not this kind. "This is unusual," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to Marcus. "Mom, why did he say our names?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His wide eyes searched hers for answers, but Angela only shook her head slightly, clearly as confused as he was. "I don't know, sweetheart," she replied softly. "But let's just focus on getting off the plane and seeing Grandma and Grandpa, okay?" Marcus nodded reluctantly, though his mind raced with possibilities. Was Ethan Caldwell simply being kind? Or was there something else, something bigger that connected them to him? When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, passengers began gathering their belongings and filing out of the plane. Marcus and Angela joined the line, keeping their heads down to avoid further attention. But as they stepped into the jet bridge, a familiar figure stood waiting for them. Ethan Caldwell, himself. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, Ethan greeted them with a warm smile that seemed genuine yet carried an air of mystery. "Angela," he said, nodding politely before turning his gaze to Marcus. "And, young man, how was your flight?" Marcus froze, unsure how to respond. This was the second time today that the CEO of Caldwell Airways had spoken directly to him, and each encounter felt stranger than the last. Finally, he managed a small, shy smile. "It was good. Thank you." Ethan chuckled lightly, his expression softening. "I'm glad to hear it." He paused, glancing briefly at Angela before continuing. "Listen, I know this might seem unusual, but I'd like to invite you both to join me for coffee after you've settled in. There's something I'd like to discuss." Angela stiffened, her defenses rising immediately. "Mr. Caldwell, we really appreciate everything you've done for us, but I'm not sure." "It's nothing complicated," Ethan interrupted gently, raising a hand to reassure her. "Just a conversation, nothing formal. Please consider it my way of making up for the earlier mix-up." His tone was so sincere, so earnest, that Angela found herself hesitating. After a moment, she relented with a cautious nod. "All right, we'll think about it." With that, Ethan handed her a small envelope containing contact information and instructions on where to meet him later. Then, with one last smile, he stepped aside to allow them to continue toward baggage claim. Once they were safely in the terminal, Angela pulled Marcus aside, her voice low but urgent. "Marcus, listen to me. Something about this feels off. I don't want you getting too excited or attached until we figure out what's going on." "But Mom," Marcus protested, "he's just being nice. Why does it have to mean anything bad?" Angela sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying we need to be careful. People like him don't usually go out of their way for people like us unless there's a reason." Her words hung heavily in the air, planting seeds of doubt in Marcus's mind. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan's actions weren't random. There was something about the way the man looked at him, as if he recognized him, as if he knew something Marcus didn't. Later that afternoon, after reuniting, with his grandparents and unpacking their bags, Marcus found himself unable to stop thinking about Ethan's invitation. His grandmother noticed his distraction during dinner and asked what was wrong. Reluctantly, Marcus told her about the events of the day, the seating issue, the upgraded seats, the announcement, and Ethan's unexpected offer. To everyone's surprise, Grandma exchanged a knowing glance with Grandpa before speaking. "Caldwell Airways, Ethan Caldwell." She trailed off thoughtfully, tapping her chin. "That name sounds familiar. Didn't your father work for them once, Angela?" The room fell silent. Angela froze mid-bite, her fork clattering onto her plate. For years, she had avoided talking about Marcus's father, a painful chapter of her life she preferred to leave closed. But now, with the weight of unanswered questions pressing down on them, it seemed impossible to ignore any longer. Could Ethan Caldwell somehow be connected to Marcus's father? And if so, what did it mean for their family? The question lingered, in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unshakable. Marcus stared at his grandmother, then at his mother, searching for answers that seemed just out of reach. Angela sat frozen, her face pale as if she'd seen a ghost. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her glass of water, but she didn't drink from it. Instead, she set it back down without a word. "Mom?" Marcus finally spoke, breaking the tense silence. "What does Grandma mean? Did Dad really work for Caldwell Airways?" Angela took a deep breath, visibly steeling herself before responding. "It's complicated," she began hesitantly. "Your father and we weren't together long. He left when you were very young, before you even started school." Marcus frowned, trying to piece together fragments of memories he barely had. His father was always a shadowy figure in his life, a name mentioned only in passing, never discussed openly. "But what does that have to do with Ethan Caldwell?" he pressed gently. Grandma exchanged another glance with Grandpa, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on, Angela," Grandma urged softly. "They deserve to know." Angela sighed deeply, her shoulders slumping as years of buried emotions resurfaced. "Your father, his name was Daniel. And yes, he worked for Caldwell Airways. Not just any job, though. He was one of their top engineers, brilliant, hardworking, full of ideas." A faint smile crossed her lips at the memory, but it quickly faded. "He was also close to Ethan Caldwell. Very close." Marcus leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Close how?" "They were friends," Angela admitted reluctantly. "More than friends, actually, they were practically family. Ethan treated Daniel like a brother. That's why it hurt so much when—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "When what?" Marcus prompted, his voice tinged with urgency. Angela hesitated before continuing. "When Daniel disappeared. One day he just left. No explanation, no goodbye. Not even a note. I tried reaching out to him, but he vanished completely. Even Ethan couldn't find him." The room fell silent again, the weight of Angela's words sinking in. Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. All this time, he'd assumed his father simply didn't care enough to stay. But now, hearing about the bond between Daniel and Ethan Caldwell, it didn't add up. "And you think Mr. Caldwell knows something?" Marcus asked quietly. "I don't know," Angela confessed. "But after today, after everything that happened on the plane, it makes me wonder. Why would someone as powerful as him take such an interest in us, unless there's more to the story?" Grandpa cleared his throat, speaking up for the first time. "Maybe it's time we found out," he suggested firmly. "If Ethan Caldwell wants to talk, maybe he has answers. Answers we've been waiting years to hear." Angela looked, torn between caution and hope. Finally, after a long pause, she nodded slowly. "All right, we'll meet him tomorrow. But Marcus," she added, turning to her son, "I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens, stay calm. Let me handle the conversation, okay?" Marcus nodded eagerly, his heart racing with anticipation. For the first time in his life, it felt like pieces of a puzzle were starting to come together, and he couldn't wait to see the bigger picture. The next morning, Angela and Marcus arrived at the cozy cafe where Ethan had invited them. It was tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, bathed in soft sunlight streaming through large windows. Ethan was already seated at a table, sipping coffee while reading a newspaper. When he spotted them, he stood immediately, offering a warm smile. "Angela, Marcus," he greeted, shaking Angela's hand and patting Marcus lightly on the shoulder. "Thank you for coming." As they settled into their seats, Ethan's demeanor shifted from friendly to serious. "There's something I need to tell you both," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Angela gripped the edge of the table tightly, bracing herself for whatever came next. Marcus held his breath, his wide eyes fixed on Ethan. "Daniel was my best friend," Ethan said simply, And your father, Marcus, was more than just an employee, he was family. Which is why his disappearance broke all of us. But what none of you know is that Daniel made sacrifices. Sacrifices meant to protect those he loved most. Ethan paused, looking directly at Marcus, including you. Ethan's words hung in the air like a fragile thread, connecting the past to the present. Marcus stared at him, his young mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Protect him. What did that even mean? And why had his father disappeared if it was all supposed to be for their good? Angela leaned forward, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and fear. What are you saying, Ethan? That Daniel left us on purpose? To protect us from something? Ethan nodded slowly, his expression heavy with regret. Yes, he admitted. But not because he wanted to. It was the hardest decision he ever made. He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. Years ago, Caldwell Airways faced a crisis, a scandal involving one of our overseas partners. They were involved in illegal activities, and when we tried to cut ties with them, they threatened retaliation. Daniel uncovered evidence that could have exposed them, but doing so put him, and by extension, his family, in danger. Marcus listened intently, his heart pounding as Ethan painted a picture of a man torn between duty and love. Daniel knew he couldn't risk bringing that kind of danger into your lives, Ethan explained. So he made the ultimate sacrifice. He faked his disappearance, severing all connections with everyone he cared about, including you, Angela, and Marcus, to ensure your safety. Tears welled up in Angela's eyes as she absorbed the weight of Ethan's revelation. All these years she had believed Daniel abandoned them without a second thought, but now knowing the truth, that he had walked away out of love, it changed everything. But why didn't he come back? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. If the danger was over, why didn't he find us? Ethan sighed deeply, his gaze softening. It wasn't that simple. Once Daniel went underground, he knew he couldn't resurface without putting you at risk again. Even after the threat passed, old habits die hard. He stayed away, thinking it was the only way to keep you safe. And where is he now? Angela pressed, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. Ethan hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out an envelope. This is why I called you here today, he said gently, sliding the envelope across the table. Daniel is alive. He's been living quietly under a new identity, far from anyone who might recognize him. But recently, he reached out to me, asking about you, Angela and Marcus. He misses you both more than words can say. Angela opened the envelope with shaking hands, revealing a handwritten letter inside. As she read the first few lines, tears streamed down her face. Marcus peeked over her shoulder, catching glimpses of phrases like "I'm so sorry" and "I never stopped loving you." For a moment, no one spoke. The cafe buzzed softly around them, but it felt distant, muted compared to the storm of emotions swirling within their small group. Finally, Angela looked up at Ethan, her voice steady despite the tears. Where is he? Can we see him? Ethan nodded. He's waiting, not far from here. If you're ready, I'll take you to him. Marcus's heart leapt with excitement and nervousness. After years of wondering, imagining, and longing, he was finally going to meet the man who had shaped so much of his life, even from afar. As they left the cafe together, hand in hand, Marcus felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. His father hadn't abandoned him. He had loved him enough to let go. And now, reunited by fate or perhaps destiny, they would begin a new chapter, one filled with forgiveness, understanding, and endless possibilities. Sometimes, life surprises us in ways we never expect. For Marcus, this flight had been more than just a journey across miles. It was a journey toward healing, truth, and a family reborn.